Hey all. Okay, I hope that we are on. Naami, Resnick, and myself are on tonight for an Instagram live. Oh, here we go. Yay. Let us invite you. Naami, I think you might have to request to be added. Oh, actually, I think I might have it. Oh, okay. So Naami and I are having a conversation tonight all about hey. Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
I'm so excited to be on here. Give me a second. I want to just lift this up on another cushion.
No problem.
So do you want to introduce yourself or like who you are or how we even got into this conversation?
Sure. So my name is Naami Resnick. I'm a therapist in private practice. I'm based out of Baltimore, but Esty and I know each other from, should we start with that?
Yeah, should we?
I think that's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe let's start.
So we met probably 15 years ago, I think, when you were in Israel.
I was in Israel. I think that's when we met. Maybe we met even before that, but yes, before. Oh no, I don't
Really?
work at Camp Simcha at a camp. Guys, we're gonna walk down this memory lane for like 2 minutes, so we won't bore you. We're gonna talk about
Yeah,
that.
then we're gonna get into the juicy stuff.
Yeah. Well, was is that I got really excited to see your platform online, and yeah, we had been, I think, counselors in the same camp, and then afterwards overlap like with your family friends and the people that I knew that I
Yeah.
was. So it was just really.
But you know what was so funny, Esty, about how I found you again on social media? I don't even know if I told you this, but when I set up the page for the therapy source, and I like was looking for content, and I kept seeing like these posts popping up that I liked, and so when I went to check them out, it was you. And I was like, oh, cool, I know her.
Yeah. So Nami and I have done a wait. So you're located in Baltimore, right? Just a little intro of who you are,
Yeah,
and you want to share like just a snippet of who you work with, or yeah.
sure. So I'm a sex and family, lots of couples therapist. My main modality is EFT, but I'm holistic, kind of dabble from anywhere. Trauma informed is my favorite, which is how I got to you. And I've worked in addictions, a lot of experience in different areas of that field. Done a lot of work in those different resources that are available to people. And one of my first jobs actually was setting up a program that connected people to resources. So that was my first hand look at how difficult it is to find the right therapist or to find the right program.
Yeah, to connect people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, now you go by Naami, right? I'm not mispronouncing it. It's not
We
Nomi.
simplify it. Nummy.
Naami.
It's
Okay, guys.
yes.
Like, okay. um, Neme and I connected, and we were talking about this specific piece. Like, besides for counseling that you provide, you also help people, which we could talk about soon, like connecting people or supporting people in their process of finding a therapist. And we ended up getting into a conversation about the struggles that people have, including ourselves. I mean, Nami, you could share for your own experience, but like I
Uh,
share being a therapist, like my own experience of like connecting to finding at a time when I was looking for a therapist, and even just with clients, like seeing the exhaustion and the confusion, or just kind of feeling lost. And some of it is like, yeah, people feel torn or conflicted about, do I want to start therapy? Do I not? Can I afford this therapist? What's right for me? Um, but that and more, we wanted to have a conversation to almost like empower clients to have like a non-traumatic experience, or a bit more of an empower. Yeah, because you could be exhausted by the time you actually show up to a therapist's office, or feel
yes.
exhausted to even try.
Right. And as Steve, that's the part that people don't talk about, right? That's the part that we don't hear about a lot. And so I know anyone following your platform knows what like what you do and the population that you work with. But it can really be almost traumatizing to feel like you're ready for help and to like take that step and to start looking for a therapist and only to realize how difficult it is before you get into the therapist's office.
Right. Yeah. People don't, people, I'll just give a little snippet about myself for anyone who doesn't know me. Right.
Yes.
Esther Goldstein. And Naami, I love how you call me Esty because that's like my nickname. You could call me whatever you want.
Do you prefer Esther? I can do whatever.
Whatever feels comfortable. You know me as Esther.
That's funny. That's a long time. Yeah, so
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So I mean, just briefly, like I have well, we were talking about this, but um yeah, I started off working with people who were struggling with addiction. I ended up specializing in trauma, and I have a practice in the Five Towns in New York that we specialize in trauma informed care, right? You're talking about like EFT, trauma informed, that kind of, they all hang out with each other. But I believe of trauma informed care, if you want to call it that, is really helping the therapy experience from beginning to end not be traumatic. And even the search of a therapist can be like, there could be parts of someone who where they want to reach out for help and parts that don't feel ready or are scared, but then even like the process of where do I start, what questions do I ask. Some people share with us questions that they have, either they're in therapy, about starting therapy. So we just wanted to have a conversation about this piece, what it could feel like, or yeah.
Sure. And the first part that I think is really so important is to validate how hard it is. That it might sound really easy, especially now that, you know, mental health has become much more popular, and all these words like anxiety and depression, and even the term mental health, right? It pops up in TV shows and we hear it a lot more than we used to. So, which is great. There's less stigma overall, which is really important. But once again, like talking about something is the first step. Doing it is a whole different ballpark. And I think, you know, if anyone's ever sat down and typed in like psychology today, you get like 1,000 different people, and it even just that can be really overwhelming. So I just want to validate how hard it is, not just to get yourself to the office, but to get started, right? To get started with that search.
I love that you're saying that because there's so many times, like I just over this weekend, I was having a conversation. I hired this person to start working with my son one-on-one, in terms of like a certain sport, certain martial arts sport. And I remember, I'm just thinking out loud, I remember we started having a conversation and he said something to me and I was like, I'm hiring you because I know how much energy it takes. All the things you're telling me, I don't have the energy for. So I'm hired. No, I'm just thinking about it. My friend was right next to me and like, we were talking about how there's times that sometimes we're lucky to have the right resources, and it's not always the case, right? But like in my head, I was thinking afterwards how you and I having this conversation, how when it comes to mental health, like often when you're thinking about reaching out, like it's great. I know I love my shows like Grey's Anatomy or any of my shows, like they bring up so many conversations of mental health. But if we could just validate right here, number one, even the thought of getting help, like if you're in a place where you notice that you need help or a loved one needs help, it usually means that you're kind of tired. And then
Yes, and that it's so important because like
yeah,
there's so many steps, right? If when so I one of my first jobs was working for an agency,
yeah,
and agencies have a lot of paperwork, right? So there are so many steps and so many hoops the clients had to jump through, only to be told that then they could be placed on the waiting list.
right,
So
right.
and people by the time they're looking for help, there's usually something going on, right? I'd say most of the time there's some kind of crisis or something happening that they're already starting from a pretty anxious place, which makes it way harder to get the resources that you're looking for to support you with this crisis. So it's a very interesting, like, sort of counterintuitive piece when it comes to looking for help, that the process could induce a little bit more anxiety.
I think if we could even just like name the fact that, say you're in a place where you're struggling or someone is struggling and you're reaching out for help, please just know that the thought of even reaching out to someone or starting to reach out, it's so normal to feel even more tired, because I always think about this, like everything in life is about energy. If we just simply, times that we're struggling, times that we're healing, times that we're in survival, times when we're utilizing like less than ideal coping, like when we have symptoms of anxiety, depression, people with obsessive thoughts, whatever it is, right? Or certain behaviors, or coping, it's all about energy. How much energy does it take to function? It takes, most of the time people are reaching out because it's taking an exhaustive amount of energy to function, to get through their day, to have to hold certain emotions or memories or their relationships,
So
right?
true. So
So
true.
so just even naming like looking for a counselor or thinking about looking for a counselor takes a certain amount of energy. Just even kind of when you're saying like it's hard and
Yeah.
like about how like things just to name it, the even the thought or thinking about it. But I think even just number two, like it takes energy. And there are times that someone might say like, should I look for therapy? And sometimes I've said to people like, if you're not in a place where you have the right resource, or if you don't have like a guide or someone supporting you, and we'll talk about different avenues of support, but or if
Sure.
you maybe put it on pause, like see if there's a way to preserve some energy over the next few months, and maybe then venture out. Like it's not a right or, and some
No, and
people are,
that's such an interesting point, Esty, right? And I think a little bit more of a different conversation, but that's a good starting place for everybody. When is the right time to seek therapy, right? Because there's sometimes, during active crisis or when something is happening that might not be the time where you need or you have that kind of energy, right? And it's a different kind of judgment call when, okay, some of my energy though, it must a triage mode,
yeah.
right? Like I have to deal with what's happening around me, but I need to support myself through this in order to do what I have to do.
How do you say
And
true? You know, like you grew up. What's true?
I learned that word not long ago. I love it. It was part of my clinical training, but it's a useful one, right? Because we don't have endless energy.
Yeah, no, yes. No, I think there's this piece. What's the term in Hebrew? Do you know the word? And how do you say that? Oh, you don't even know.
No, I don't.
Like sometimes it's like hunker down, preserve the energy, get through. And I actually, if I
Sure.
could this for 1 second. So the other day, and I love that we're having this. So like the other day I was like looking at someone on Instagram, and she's really inspiring. She's all about like manifesting, tapping into good energy. And I loved somebody asked her a question, and they said like, what if you're in like the worst place of your life? You're going to tell me to like be in a zen place in my homeless shelter and imagine like
Oh
you
gosh.
and
No.
I loved what she said. And she was like, no, you're going to think about like 2 inches 2 inches to the right of where you're at. Don't think these like big theoretical concepts. And she talks a little bit about like times in her life where she was in a really difficult place, and she was like an active addiction and things like that.
Wow.
Sometimes, yeah, I think sometimes when we think about like um next steps or moving ahead, it's like you can have it, we want to be mindful, or when you're listening to listen to try to find resources, be mindful of like, is the information you're listening to on Instagram or even our conversation or stuff you're
Yeah.
finding helpful to you? Because if you're in a horribly dark place, no, you're not going to be in this like la la land of like, oh, just going to hop on a call and have a conversation with 17 different therapists who fifth the way that post was funny.
Yes.
Not funny, but they're not going to call me back. Like just saying like, let's just name the fact that sometimes you're not in that awesome energetic place.
And when you're not, that's when it can even be more difficult. You call a therapist and they don't have room, or you have that 15-minute consult and it's clearly not a match. It can feel like a rejection, and a rejection is can be kind of hard to navigate the best of times, right? And when people who are looking for help are vulnerable. And so those are all things that kind of go into this process that we really simplify. Like I think we talk about it, everyone's like, yeah, go get help, go get a
Yeah.
therapist. Or you have anxiety, you can, there's a pill you can take to deal with that. And even medication, right? Medication is such a process to get right. Like you have to know what to expect. You have to know about the side effects. If your psychiatrist is a 15 minutes appointments without a lot of follow-up. Right? So there's a lot of self-advocacy that I think has to be part of this process that people aren't so aware of. So my first step, especially when I'm talking to people about this, is to kind of tear away that mystique or this mysterious process called like the therapy process. And I find it helpful to view it a lot like dating, which is that we're looking for the right match. Not every therapist, right, no matter how well qualified, no matter how many years of experience, is going to be a good match for each client. And the cool part is like, yeah, that is on your therapist to know. Like, it's on the therapist that you call. If they specialize in play therapy and children, if you're a 22-year-old adult, right, who's looking for some support, it is on them to let you know we're not a match. But a lot of that you bring with you. So that's why like what I love that word empowered, because I find a lot of people, right, you come into the therapist office the first time and you're scared and you're nervous and it's almost like you don't know what's going to happen. And I like to I start off by giving a lot of that power right back to them. I'm like, this is your show. This is your process. You don't like something I say, you have a question about some of the paperwork. I go and I ask you a question, I lead you in a direction you don't like. I give you full permission to like call me out or say like, hey, you use that word. I really think it's more like this because this is about you. And right away, that kind of strips away this mystique of like the therapist, because the therapist is just a person and the client is the one who brings the energy, right? Not just the energy, but their own personal individual traits and experiences to the process, and we co-create together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just like giving up of power, that kind of like coming in or approaching it as like my therapist is going to like know everything and have all the answers can create a lot of like worry about the unknown or like what will happen in this therapy process. And I even like, so like in therapy, I like to tell some people, so I do this with like couples or family work. Sometimes it's really scary, right? Even when we're talking about breaking a cycle that's been in place for so long. And we've done so much work and there's so much more awareness about how it's been, having negative consequences or like it's been making me show up in my life in a way that I don't want anymore. All of a sudden, when we're looking ahead and I'm kind of like, wow, imagine that I don't do that anymore. There's a lot of unknown there. And even though you can kind of see it with your logical brain, it can feel scary. And knowing that you are in control, like you're the one who can kind of go, you know what? That's a little much for me right now. Let's focus on that next week. Or could you scale that down for me? Like, I can't do that right now. That freaks me out. That's totally something that you are allowed to say. In fact, you should say to your therapist.
Yeah, you're talking about a very evolved client, and maybe we could talk about step by step, because I think, how you and I
Yeah,
were talking
let's dial it down.
No, I love that.
Okay.
I think that someone like you or I, who are therapists field, or like it takes, I was telling you about things that I've shifted in my life, and you're like, wow, it's so good that. I'm like, it took me such a long time to realize a practical thing made my life exponentially more manageable, right? So when you and I were talking and you said that, I'm like, wow, some of us, because we have, let's say, knowledge, or because maybe we've like been rejected by therapists, which I want to go back to that piece on rejection, but I think there's this piece of like, maybe in our conversation, if I think about what I'm hoping for people to get out of this conversation or hope to begin, that maybe we'll continue in this conversation, is let's maybe starting to like kind of what you were saying, like laying the groundwork of you becoming a more empowered client, and just knowing that like, yeah, old fashioned therapy is like the therapist sitting on their chair, like behind you, and they're going to help you heal. Like, it's like you're going to your therapist, you're investing time, energy, and money, if it's through insurance or even privately.
Yeah.
And the position is like, I'm coming to you for you to help me, and I expect you to have a certain level of honesty and professional integrity that you are going to let me know if you can help me. And we'll talk about that in like a minute. But if a client, if a therapist is confusing or unclear, or if you're not sure if they're good for you, like you have not just the right, but it's almost like, I almost feel like Naami, for me and you to be behind whoever's listening to this, like we support you.
Yes.
And
exactly.
right? I think support, like I think we all need support. Like we support you in coming back and saying, wait, hold on a second. So you do have experience working with people in toxic relationships?
We
like
encourage you, right? We not just to support you, but we encourage you to
yeah.
speak up.
Like, don't
I think that's the point.
about your therapist's feelings. Like, how we were taught, like, it's like people get worried about their therapist's feelings. Like, you don't, I mean, coming in and you're like ripping your therapist apart. And if you do, that's to look at. Why? Like, I've had times where I'm like, oh my God, you're a porcupine. Let's work, right? But
Sure.
but aside
Or I
from
mean,
that,
Esty, even that, like sometimes I do tell my clients, I'm like, you can tantrum with me. That is totally fine. You want to scream, you want to yell, like this is actually the place to do it, right? But then we're going to talk about it. So if you want to tantrum, that's awesome. I'm totally down for that. I might tell that to couples too sometimes. If they're like blaming each other, going at each other, I'd be like, here, over here, tantrum to me. because the therapist office is the place where you don't have to put on a show, right? Where that kind of polite facade that we kind of have, where we wonder, you're out with a group of friends and someone says something and you have a question, but you're not sure if you can say it, and you're kind of filtering everything through that social lens. So I would go ahead and say, kind of cautiously, right, with some reservations, that you don't have to have that in your therapist's office, right? Like, I think, Esty, one of our questions was if they could ask their therapist, she wants to know if her therapist likes her, right? And I think that's really natural to wonder about someone we spend a lot of time with. And we can go ahead and name also, it's a pretty weird relationship. It is a relationship, very much so, but it's one of the strangest ones that you're going to have, right? Because it's not equal. So naming that, I think, can be helpful. And we always wonder, do they like me? What do they think about me? Right? These are very natural things. So, Esty, what would you say? I've certainly had clients ask me that before, and I always welcome it because it's an opportunity for us to explore our relationship. And sometimes I hear from people, well, but I don't want to be here. I don't care about our relationship. Like, I want to work on my own things. That's what I came for. But the therapeutic relationship is a model and like a testing ground for all those relationships outside the office.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when a client, I guess when I saw the question of, is it okay to ask my therapist? First of all, I love your candidness. I love your realness. I love how you invite like all those big emotions because like I imagine your clients feel safe with you. Like that's part of safety. I
Yeah.
think times when we're starting with a therapist, I think it's okay to take time to see if you can trust them. But a good therapist, like, yeah, you should exactly what you're saying, like all those social filters, like, no, we have those burdens in everyday life. Like, please find yourself
Yeah.
someone time you can take those off. Do you know?
Like,
Or
have you ever heard, I think I saw in the other questions, right? People who are kind of like dancing around their therapist's feelings. Like, oh,
yeah,
my therapist took off for 2 weeks. And I was really upset about that. Like, I've heard that from a few people. Can I ask them what they're doing? Can I ask them this? And I mean, yeah, I guess you don't want to like scream and yell if you can help it, but you can ask just about anything. And it's up to the therapist to kind of handle that. It's not on the client. I think that's the difference.
yeah, I think that's part of the work. Like back to the question of the client who was saying, can I ask my therapist if they like me? I guess my mind goes in two locations is one is like you're a social creature and of course you want to know like how you perceived and experienced and we all do. And then specific for that person, I wonder if they have some anxiety about being liked and if the people in their life, either childhood or even recent relationships, didn't let them know how they felt. Because sometimes there's that insecure attachment of like, I don't really know if I can trust you. Like maybe people said they liked you, but then they like mocked you or they backstabbed you or you had like a very disorganized. And so I think a little bit in terms of attachment of like, is there an insecurity there? That might be there, or it might just be like social norms of I want to know that you like me. So that's what I get curious about. Like, meaning if a client would ask me, I think my natural before I go to reassure them, like first of all, I want to help them also learn how to read body language and energy.
Mm, yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, you probably also feel this way, but I'm like, I can only really work with someone who I like. Like, there needs to be like I like to see you. Now, are there some people you have to
Yeah.
jive well with, and there's different kinds of jiving. And if you're working with a client where you don't jive as well with, a lot of times that's the work. I remember a client was saying, but we have this tension. I'm like, but that's your work in your life right here. And so
That's it, right? So sometimes it's easier, right? Those clients that you feel something right away with, it's easier than the clients you just click with. And I'm like, cool, like we can do great work together, but we're gonna have to dig a little because you're not here because of the relationships in your life that are going really well,
right,
right?
like
That's not what's happening.
right, like you don't have to be chummy chum and be like people pleasing and make me feel good. Like it's okay, But I think so. There's that piece. I think the other piece is like, listen, like let's look at what that means to be liked in a therapeutic relationship. Like there needs to be a level of like, I like you, I care about you, I connect with you, right? And then I think it goes into the whole piece of like transference. Like how much do I need to? I think we need to like all of our. That's what I'm saying. Like I don't think
Yeah.
a therapist. I was once at a training and this therapist was talking about a specific client, and I was so disturbed by the way she was talking about the person. She didn't say that, but like it didn't seem like she connected with that client. And to me, I'm like, we're all human. We're all therapists. We're all clients. We're all givers. We're all takers. Like we're all in the same boat. Okay. Like, of course, there's boundaries.
Right.
But I don't know. I think there's a piece of candidness of like, hello, listen, I'm sitting right here with you. I think about the clinical struggles that you have. I'm in this field because I want to help, but I'm working with you. And there's a few people that I work with, and that's basically all. But kind of letting them know, I'm like, of course. And I'm wondering if, like, as you're asking me this question, if you could just check in on like my energy towards you, can you feel into that? Yeah. What is it? So I think
I
that
see. You know what I'm wondering, which I'm noticing, right? And this is because it's so easy to move away from what we originally were talking about, right? The struggle of finding a therapist. Because this, once you get to the office, once you meet the therapist, there's so much to talk about. But, and what strikes me a lot about how the difficulty of finding a therapist is how lonely that can be, right? It's so isolating. Once you get in the therapist's door, once you get in front of someone, then you have all the juicy stuff that we just talked about, right? Because you're doing it with somebody. You're
yeah.
doing it with the therapist. So you can go back to your friends and you can kind of talk about, well, I felt this friction. There's that contact. And the finding a therapist can be so isolating. It's enough to turn a lot of people off, right? From persevering. And I know we mentioned the rejection part already, but then there's the paperwork hoops, right? There's like the
I
technical pieces.
can go back to the rejection piece if it's okay, because I
Right.
will look at the pieces that are difficult about, and I love that you went back there because we just went through the juicy stuff, but it's really like it's so, and maybe like it's lonely. It can feel so like just feeling so misunderstood. Like literally over this weekend, I hosted a bunch of friends, and one of the friends was saying how she's like looking for a new therapist, and then a few people at the table were like, "Yeah, like find someone good." And I watched her body language like drop, and I said, "Wait, is this helpful to you?" Like, no, I'm just feeling like
Well, because
we're
it's like, yeah, I'm gonna look for someone terrible who doesn't suit me. Like, no, of course, like you know what you want. It's
right,
how to find it.
right.
That's hard.
So then I was like, well, what is it that you need in order to think about the idea of finding someone different? Because she's with someone who's not helpful to her. And so I said, how about we just say that you don't need to change anything right now? Like, I think some of kind of, you're talking about the loneliness, like
Yeah.
there could be loneliness, there could be panic and fear. Like, I really need help. Am I going to get the right help?
And
Is there,
let's be real, there's that deep worry, which I think we all carry, that I am doing something wrong. Everybody else is getting it right. And why am I messing this up? Right? Everybody else finds therapists, right? And it works so well for them. Why am I struggling? And I think sometimes realizing that your current therapist isn't helping move you towards the place you want to get can be even scarier, because then you have to break up with your therapist, which is something else that I don't think people really realize they can do. And like ghosting, very common also in dating, but also with your therapist. I ghosted several therapists. One of the most healing experiences though that I went through in my process of um, so I've been in therapy. I'm 33. I've been in and out of therapy since I was 16. Thanks, mom and dad. But I started with one therapist. After I moved to the States, I ghosted her for 2 years. And then when I called her back, I was going through a very hard time. And I called her back, and I knew she had expanded, and I was kind of like, the feeling so bad and so anxious and so guilty because I had ghosted her, and we had done some really good work together, and I had just like missed an appointment and never went back. And she responded right away. And not only did she not give me any like no guilt, no criticism, but she told me that she's not actually accepting new clients, but she keeps a block of time in her week for returning clients because she prioritizes seeing them. And she is my current therapist, and that was in itself such an incredibly healing experience. Like that part of me, right, that really sucked at goodbyes, and I'm not going to get into my journeys back and forth across the ocean, but like leaving and endings were something that was so hard for me. That was a very healing experience to have. So I was lucky in that aspect. But I always am thinking about the flip side, right? Someone who reaches out in a really desperate moment, their life feels like it's out of control around them, and they get back a rejection. They get back, sorry, like we'll put you on the waiting list. What are you supposed to do with that, right? Like,
or wow, you sound like a wonderful person. I don't know if I have the right skills to help you, or
yeah, like, thank you. So I'm just beyond.
I'm
Yeah.
help. I'm too.
Yes.
I'm beyond help.
I'm beyond help. And I think, yeah, I don't know if you ever been rejected by a therapist, but that's definitely one place your brain goes, you know?
I was rejected, but let's talk about this for a second. And I'm like, and I feel like I'm such a good client, but I remember I went to training, so I had seen a therapist for a while, and then I moved countries. Right? I know we had overlap with the countries of where we,
Yes.
and then I was looking for someone good. We'll have a different conversation about breakups with therapists because there's so much
True.
power.
True. That's a different
Ending
conversation.
feels like I feel like there's something really powerful, and essentially, yeah, like kind of what we're both agreeing is that therapy is a relationship that's meant to help you propel you and work through things so you can have a delicious, loving, nourishing, thriving life. But it's a but and a really therapeutic, healthy relationship. Like a therapeutic relationship could be incredibly powerful and healing, and it could be really uncomfortable, but it could be a great space to unpack the stuff. But I guess I'm also hoping just in this moment to implant a little bit of hope because Nami and I are both people, just from what we were saying, who are therapists who have been in therapy or are in therapy, and it hasn't been well. Like I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, I found one therapist and my life has been easy ever since then. To me, when I'll just share for a minute, like when I had to shift therapists because I moved, I loved who I was working with. Um, and I remember, I went to a training. I was already a therapist, and I went to a training and I found someone I really liked. And but I was like really, I just like come back from a different country. I was like a little disorganized. And I remember reaching out to her and I was so afraid of like overwhelming her. So I said, I think I just need a couple of sessions. I have like a little smidge of anxiety. I'm
Sure.
easy client to work with, you know? So I said, I think I just need like a couple of sessions. And she's like, I don't know if you're a couple, but I don't know if I'm the right fit. And I remember being so hurt
Oh,
because
yes.
and it's okay because I ended up like with someone who was like a way better fit, but it doesn't
Well,
matter.
Esty, I think that's always the point. Sorry, Esther. That is the point, that it's normal for it to be hard. It's actually not supposed to be hard, but part of finding the right person for you, right? Part of finding a match that's going to work is kind of inevitably that some people won't be for me. Some of us really won't be a good fit only because there's a better fit out there.
Right, right. And I do have to say, I'm agreeing with you. That's in the bigger picture. I do have to say that if anybody has rejection or abandonment, which a lot of us have, or anxiety or relationship issues, or
Can't
with
imagine. Who?
like the search of looking for a therapist just feels so sensitive. And we're not saying like don't do it. We're just saying like I remember just feeling so I felt like a balloon, and I felt like a deflated balloon because I felt so like confident that she's for sure gonna take me on because I'm like sweet,
Yeah.
my therapist. Um and then I just have to say from the hopeful part, I met someone who was just wonderful. Like also like just like you're talking about match in terms of like partnership, right? Or even
Yeah,
friendship.
it's a relationship, right? So we're looking for that good match.
The good match. And I just have to say that like, and I don't care how nutty or how shut down or how depressed or how anxious or how needy or however you are, like there are dynamics that work. I like it's I always say it's a cocktail. Like some cocktails are yuck, like my friend
Such a good word for it.
coconut and orange juice, and I was like, ew. I'm like, you coconut is good with these flavors and orange juice is good. But I just have to say, like, there is someone for everyone. And if you're really I'm just gonna go heebie jeebie for a second, and I like energetically kind
Take
of
it
how you
away. Yeah.
spoke. I really know this because I've seen it, but like if you are really hungry for healing, if you are really persistent about this goal, take one time. You're gonna find that person who doesn't like isn't just like, oh, I'll tolerate you. It's like, oh my God, you're fascinating, or you intrigue me, or I love working with these kinds of presentations. So like maybe just naming like it's exhausting, but that doesn't mean people say, oh, this person's amazing. I was looking for someone for my son like a while ago, a couple of years ago, and I
Mm.
when I asked someone, I reached out to someone, and I was asking about her experience, and she's like, hello, I wrote this book and this book and this book and this book. And I said, right, I want to know if you understand the book of my child.
Yeah.
And like, I was so
Right.
turned off. I was so turned off. And she was like, so do you want to?
Mhm.
And I said, not really, this would be a good fit. Um,
You got to use a good fit piece. And no, and that's, it's such an important point, right? And that's, you're not looking just for someone that's going to be like a meh fit or like a okay, right? You're looking for someone that's really going to be the right person to help you heal. And that's not going to be everyone, but if you really want it, and it'll happen, right? Because everybody deserves to heal. And that's, I think, like sort of my motivation and sort of having these conversations and getting this idea out here is because all those thoughts that come up where we wonder, like, am I doing this right? Is this worth it? Right? Like if a therapist can reject me, if I'm too much for a therapist, if my issues, if my anxiety, my depression, my ruminating thoughts, if all that's too much for a trained mental health professional, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's too much. So I think that's my sort of hopeful, empowering message that I love for people to walk away with is that it is worth it. Healing is worth it. Finding the right person is worth it. And those people who want to help you heal, right? Those people who want to work with you and are the perfect fit for you, they're out there looking for you too. So each rejection really is a step towards them, right? Because you learn something more about what you're looking for with each rejection. Like, I just keep pushing that framework, right? Because it's not a personal rejection of you at all, but that it brings you one step closer to that person that is going to say, you're exactly my profile. I have so much experience in that, and I'm dying to work with you.
I love how you were saying there's these two words that you said. One is you're worthy of healing, right? And I think that's just a really powerful, like whoever is listening to this now, or if there's someone in your life that's struggling, just like, yes, you are worthy. I remember once seeing a quote and it's like, you're worthy of functioning and living life in a way that feels nice. Like,
You're
let's not,
worthy of feeling good. Like I get up every day and I'm like, I invest a lot of time in
yeah,
healing. And I've tried so many different things, right? And sometimes I ask myself, right? And I'm like, oh, is this really worth it? And I've been fortunate enough to have therapists or friends, who've kind of been able to tell me that when I forget it. And that's the second point. That's kind of like my TED talk with this, is that so a lot of the harm and the hurt and the wounds, it happens in isolation. And I
yeah,
really solidified this during my work in addictions. I'm sure that you heard that also. And the healing has to happen in community, in connection, in partnership. That's why the search is worth it. And that's why talking to your friends or even reaching out for support during that process is so important. Because if you share that with someone, right, that's the beginning of healing. Telling someone, I'm looking for a therapist and it's been really hard. And that person going, that's awesome, good for you, right? You know that you deserve this. That's encouraging. That gives you that reminder that this is worth it and important. And even before you get to your therapist's office, you're tapping in to that healing power. You're tapping back into connection. And that's such a powerful move to do for yourself.
yeah. I think the piece that you're talking about earlier, how like lonely and isolating it can be, and it is. I just want to kind of, it's connected. I think finding your people, like it's just a big lesson. You're talking about your TED Talk, like a big lesson, kind of what you're saying here.
Sure.
Healing when we have support. Now, obviously, therapy is not the only form of support, but good psychotherapy can and is often incredibly powerful. But I do have to say, like, even leaning on the supports you have right now, and it could be something like reaching out to a community organization or scheduling a time at a clinic or at a center or with someone who might be a resource or a certain page and just saying like, this is my like date with my soul or with my heart or with my wounding right now.
Sure. Or even SD in my sorry, I keep forgetting. In my work in the community program, we're fortunate enough now to have, especially during COVID, so many online resources. Sometimes, right, in-person contact or walking into a group can be a lot. It can be intimidating. You can feel like pressure. There are so many good resources online, right? There's clips, there's online courses, there's trainings, there's support groups. You can log in and keep your camera off if that feels like a lot. But because you can start with as little or as much as feels comfortable to you, like kind of that gray
Yeah,
zone.
that's what I'm kind of, because you're talking about resources. I think that some people are fortunate to have more resources and some have less. But the way that I've seen it and kind of what you're saying is that if you tap into one, it's often like it's going to expand. Like you, and you're talking about the
Yes.
stopping certain behaviors. Like you don't know what's next, but if you just open one little door, you'll often open up more other doors. And you don't even have to know what's coming next, but take that one step. And I do have to say, you even said like connection is healing, like even bad therapy, or even like to me, what I've seen, I think about success or success and healing. Like, is healing worth it? I don't know. I don't know if it's black or white, to be honest, because I think this thing of life is a blend of like joys and love and happiness and pain and difficulty. You know what I mean? I don't think it's so black and white of like, my life was hard and then my life became easy and come in this journey of
Sure.
healing. Like, it's about becoming more resourceful and resilient and obviously lessening some of those symptoms or managing them better, and bringing healthier relationships into life. But I think there's this piece of like, I totally just lost my train of thought. Oh, connection. Oh, I think there's this piece of like people who are successful or people who actually get to healing or whatever it is that you're talking about, right, in life, are people who are persistent. And if there's a message kind of that I would say is like, even if you met two terrible therapists, when I was in this phase of interviewing therapists,
Mm-hmm.
so I remember sitting on the floor crying, like my mom and my sister came over, and I
Uh-huh.
was, guys, I'm smart and I'm getting really good names, and they don't know what they're talking about. Like I'm lit, like, or they just don't have the capacity. And I found someone after, but I'm saying like there was this piece of like, but and I remember like my sister was like, "You're so persistent. I'm telling you, you're gonna find someone amazing." But I just have to say to anyone, like, please don't give up. Like in any arena of life, like people who are persistent are the ones who like it's disappointing. Or you're talking about dating, right? It's like, please don't allow your dream or your goal to become deflated in the process, because it is tiring. But like, yes, your healing is worth it, or your goals are worth it.
Well, and Essie, I love how you mentioned, right? Your mom and your sister came over. That's what I'm encouraging people to look for, right? Whether it's a professional or whether it's a friend, but
Yeah.
don't do that alone, because that's that draining part where you get that sort of strength and motivation to keep going is the connection, right? Is knowing
So,
that there be people that, or online, not people, or
right,
a resource, like something else, that some support that
you
you can find.
tap into any form. Right. I want to like make it not about me. So basically, for our messages, tap into any kind of connection or support that you can, because connection is truly what allows someone to be able to then connect to something else, which will often connect them to whatever the next thing is.
Sure. And I like what you said also. Listen, healing is not black and white, but
Yeah.
choosing to opt into living life in general, right? As I wanted to get better. I want to work on this. I want to make the process about improving, right? Not about, well, we're always going to be accepting the things that we can't change, right? But then the things that feel truly intolerable, there's the reason usually is that there is some kind of change that can be made. So when you opt in with that mindset of where can I make a small improvement? How can I heal? How can I change? It just puts you on that trajectory of living a life without those things that feel like too much, right? To
Saying, I want to thank you for saying that. Yes, I do believe, and I have seen and I have experienced huge shifts, and that good healing. And obviously, like, if I believe in it, right? Because like therapists, even like training them, like, we need to be offering our clients relief of symptoms. Like, don't go to therapy to just like, I don't mean that like,
yes.
I, I, life is like you're always going to suffer. What I mean is, of course, the incremental and trackable, like some symptoms I've seen, like in my own self or in other people, like, whoa, oh my goodness. Like I was looking at like 5 years ago to like a somatic symptom I had, and it's like gone. And even like with clients I've worked with, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then this, like, of course, healing is possible. What I mean is, it's not a matter of life being perfect, but yes, yes, real healing is possible. Yes, real shifts are possible. And yes, I'm agreeing with you 100% on that.
Yeah, and learning to recognize those small things and noticing how they all connect and add up into a really big shift and improved quality of life is one of the skills that we develop in therapy, but it's something that you can develop also outside of therapy, right? To notice when we look back. That's the point of looking back sometimes, to kind of notice I made that call, I spoke to that person, look at the chain of events that unfolded, right?
Yeah.
When I was kind of validating whatever support you need to keep going, right? Even when it doesn't feel like it's worth it at times, that's valid, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in therapy, it's asking your therapist to offer question. If it's reaching out to someone that you might think you know, you're not sure what the response would be, those risks are worth it. That's kind of a message I'd hope people, you know, would walk away from here knowing that that push is, it's all worth it, even though we both know how incredibly hard it can feel.
But on the other end, when you find that person or when you get connected to the right resources, therapy, and even other resources, like I know for myself, I go to hot yoga, I go to boxing. And no, I wouldn't say go to boxing instead of therapy. Like,
No, right? The amount of times I've heard people say, should I go to therapy? I have good friends. I can talk to my friends. No, like you need friends, but you also need a therapist. Essie, so I think a couple practical things might be really helpful, right?
yeah.
We had some practical questions, I think. So the first one that I just like to always start with, though, if you get a weird vibe from a therapist, or you know you don't like something, it's always valid to ask about it. Right? If the therapist says something and you notice you're feeling kind of uncomfortable, you can. I would strongly encourage you to bring that up in therapy, in your session, right? Like I think one of the questions was, how do I know if the friction is coming from me or coming from the therapist? That's a great question to ask the therapist. And just because I know sometimes the words are hard, that could sound something like, hey, like I noticed when I asked you this question, your response felt kind of hostile to me. Was that true, or was that an accurate read? And that just opens up a really great conversation for the therapy setting.
And if you're therapist and you know you're asking about attachment, you shouldn't be walking around with that question. Meaning it's okay if you're holding it, but like
Yeah.
if your therapist doesn't have the capacity to answer that, or if they deflect or they gaslight you, they are not a good therapist. And please, like bad therapy is worse than no therapy. So if there is some kind of implicit dynamic, or if they're shaming you, if they're like, what are you talking about? Like, even if it's from your own attachment stuff and you're picking up on this hostile read, a healthy therapist would say like, that's so interesting. Like, remind me what that was, or I don't recall. Let's say there wasn't anything. I don't recall feeling anything that's bothering me, but like, let's just think back to it, or let me just check in. And they would like process it with you. Or they might say, wow, actually, like there was something you had just said and I might have been thrown, but I'm sorry that conveyed. Let's just talk about it. But if
Yeah.
you get other than like an open, like, yeah, your wording, love your wording, copy and paste that wording. But if you don't get an open response, if the therapist is reactive and isn't able to be like open, then that's like a red flag. So, and I love how you're saying, like, bring it up. If it's not if it's a new therapist and you have weird heebie-jeebie vibes or something's rubbing you the wrong way, then maybe consider not seeing them
It's
again.
not a match. Well, because above all, and I think another question was, how do I know if my relationship with the therapist is good? And so that is really challenging, right? It's because any new relationship, it can take time to like vibe check, right? Like, is this a safe place for me? And I think, Essie, that was a good point. You said it takes time to get used to people, to get to know someone, and for trust to build. But there needs to be a certain safety that is on your therapist to create right away, right? Like I know I mentioned, I give my clients permission right away to ask me about anything that they're wondering, right? So safety is key to setting up a healthy therapeutic dynamic, and it's not on the client to create that. So if it's been a couple sessions and you feel like there are things that are scary or intimidating or that you're not comfortable asking, that could be something to look at, or it could be something to ask about. I would encourage you to ask your therapist them, but if you don't feel like you can, then that's something, it's a good way of checking the safety temperature on the
Yeah.
relationship.
I think the only like caveat, the only piece that I would say is like, if you have a hard time trusting and you're starting to feel comfortable with your therapist and you're feeling even more mistrustful, but if objectively everything else is feeling fine, bring it up and say, I'm feeling very mistrustful, because maybe what's happening is that your system is starting to settle, but you're having a part of you that's terrified of being hurt, or of, your trust being broken if it was broken in the past. And I would say to the therapist, I really need some help. And a skilled therapist might say, it's so interesting because as you're starting to settle in, you're feeling very frightened. Let's work with that part of you.
Yes.
Because I've had times where clients in the beginning are like, oh, you're great. And I always, in the first session, it's like, let's just name the fact that you might feel annoyed with me, or you might not have liked something that I say, or I might step on your toes figuratively. We're going to bring it up. I'll bring it up. You bring it up. Like, we're naming it because this is the place to talk about all those things.
Sure. But see, Esther, that's where you create safety, right?
Right.
That's you as the professional say, naming it so that the client doesn't have to.
Yeah.
So there's the majority of the responsibility is on your therapist. right? Which is why I want, like, clients should be aware of it, but
Yeah.
ideally that's something that your therapist is
Yeah, it's
mindful of.
right. If you start shutting down or if you start acting a little passive or if you're on your phone in session, then it is on your therapist to say, hey, you, I noticed you haven't been like, going
Yeah.
on. Talk about it, right? Instead of them being like, do you want to be in therapy or not? Right? It's like,
Oh my
no.
gosh, that's like daddy vibes, you know? But
Yeah.
what's so interesting, I mean, to me, and fun about these conversations and hard though, is that there are not a lot of black and white rules, which is why this is complicated. So that, like, the main takeaway is you know yourself best. You know yourself way better than your therapist.
Yeah.
And so if something feels off to you or there's something you want to ask about, right, that's valid. Even if your therapist says, like, no, like, that was fine, you can ask that, or even if your therapist might not recognize it right away, your own instinct is enough to go on, right? Because that's what we're getting back to. You know what works for you. You know what's right for you.
Yeah. I think it's like, even when we're reaching out for help, even when we're really struggling, even when we don't have the most ideal relational framework, it's really important to trust our gut and not to override that and to take time and to be almost never neglect yourself in the process of reaching out for help for anything, your doctor, your dentist, if you like, no, like have this assertiveness or check back in with yourself or cancel the next session or just say something's not feeling right. Or if you need to, when it feels too terrifying, ghost your therapist. I'm not saying that people should. I'm just saying, like, you need to take care of yourself. You're not in a marriage contract. You're not like in our services agreement. Oh, somebody asked this question. We'll talk about it in a second. But like, you don't owe anything to anyone. This is about you. Obviously, if it's a therapeutic relationship, it's best to end in whatever kind of ending. But if it feels too terrifying for you because endings are scary or something happened or they did something wrong, or it just doesn't feel okay, like it's okay. Like the therapist can handle it with
Right.
it.
Like, kind of circling back to what we started with, the purpose of this is not to re-traumatize anyone, right?
Yeah,
So you know your threshold, you know your tolerance level, and you know what you can handle. So if
yeah.
anything feels like it's pushing that edge, that's your sign to do what you have to do, right? I think that's the go-to.
The one other question somebody asked, where do you report your therapist to? I mean, at our practice, we have a services agreement, and for each of the clinicians, like we're under different licensing boards. If someone's an art therapist or a social worker, in every therapist should have on their forms, on their agreement, information about them, and if they ever do anything unethical, and also like confidentiality, like who you should call. But really, you can look up their licensing board, and you can always call their licensing board that they're under, whatever state you're in, and file a complaint. There's like, it's very pretty simple and straightforward how to file.
That is one of the benefits of working with a licensed therapist, right?
Yeah.
There's accountability. There's a board. We all answer. We are answer to our various boards. I'm in Maryland. I'm at LCPC. That's a great thing to know about your therapist, right? Before starting, what their license is and what board they answer to. And that's perfectly valid to ask them, right? That's information that they should offer you. So
Yeah.
there's accountability, which is, I think, for someone that we all answer to. Like, I enjoy having that in place, right? Because we all need a certain safety. It's vulnerable work that we're doing together, right? People are coming in and talking about things that they've never said out loud before.
Yeah.
Privilege, it's a responsibility, and it has to come with some kind of accountability, right? I mean, we go through the hours of supervision, we go through the schooling, we go through the ongoing education because this is important. Like, you coming in and talking about what's going on with you is a privilege, right? And that's not something that I don't take lightly. And I know that most therapists do understand, like, the privilege and the honor of what it is that we get to do.
Yeah. I have to wrap up because I got to go. My little munchkin came out of bed and I have to go back to finishing up.
Oh, of course.
Let's wrap up. Could we just talk a little bit about what this thing is that you told me that you help people with,
Sure.
connecting them to have this like
Okay.
service of
So
helping.
I'll go through, like, I'll summarize it, and then anyone who wants to can follow up, and gotta get
Yeah.
Munchkin to bed. So
Yeah.
it's called the Therapy Source, and I do therapy consultations for people, and it's based on this belief of that we don't have to do any of this alone. But so I help people and support them with the therapy process, and that's people who've either been burned by therapy before, right? Like, they've had a bad experience and they're kind of hesitant to try again. Sometimes it's triage, right? Because sometimes we don't know where to start. You're kind of like, my partner and I are fighting. My son was arrested last night. My 13-year-old is cutting herself, and I'm overwhelmed, right? So sometimes it's hard to pick those pieces apart and know where to start. So these therapy consultations that I do offer support with that whole process. I want to hold you by the hand. We're going to dive in head first, and we're going to figure out how to get you to the right place. And I'd like to do that not just with names and numbers, right? But with giving people the tools to be more discerning, to empower themselves to figure out what they need. So I will handhold you, right? Because like I said, this is a hard, scary process. But the idea is that when you call up the therapist for that 15-minute consult, you'll be able to know. You'll be able to hold that framework of, I'm interviewing you, right? And I know what I need. And I don't know if you'll work for me or not. And that could go either way. And if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else. And then you come back to me and we recalibrate. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I love it. Essentially, you're not just giving like referral names, but you're actually hand-holding and helping them engage in a process where they're learning more skills about what can they do, how can they make the most out of their seeking therapy experience, and they don't feel alone in it. So I love when you mentioned this service. I love it. I'll link it below, like a way to get in touch with you. I do have to wrap up because I'm not good at asking like two separate anything.
Focus on Munchkin. Esther, this was
Anything,
so great.
yeah, any little tidbit you want to leave with before we wrap? Because I'm so grateful for this conversation and anything that you're with.
I think I would just reiterate that piece that I truly believe everyone deserves to heal, and we all deserve support, and you don't have to do it alone. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's the most important part.
Yes, you don't have to do it alone. Naami, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we can have many more conversations. We'll
Yes,
do this.
definitely. Have a
Your
good night.
conversation. Yes, have a good night. Thank you all. Bye.